It was a thrilling British Grand Prix with two British drivers on the podium, and Verstappen came home to take his 6th win in a row, which is an unbelievable achievement in itself. There were so many talking points from this weekend, particularly with McLaren, who seemed to be able to fight with the top cars right at the front. There's a lot to talk about, so here's my 5 things we learned from the British Grand Prix. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Verstappen continues to shine. Verstappen's winning streak has continued at Silverstone and he's made it 6 wins in a row. It was a strong performance once again from the Dutch driver as he was fighting with different drivers once again. It was a calm and composed race as he had plenty of capacity to be tracking other drivers on track. Early on, after Ferrari made a strange call to pit Leclerc very early on, he was already confident that he was on the right strategy and would continue to extend his stint on the medium tyres given the degradation was far less than anticipated. Even early on, when Verstappen lost the lead off the line to Norris, he looked calm and comfortable that he would be able to get back. It was perhaps the first time in a while where there was some realistic competition at the front, but even then, Verstappen was dominant. He secured the win with the fastest lap once again, and he's on the way to catching up to Vettel's record of 9 race wins in a row. I think Red Bull's dominance is still very much there, but perhaps there are signs of the cars behind them starting to find a way back to compete with each other. It would be a highly competitive championship if Verstappen wasn't in it, but until another team finds a way to consistently match the pace of the Austrian team, it won't be the case. Verstappen did have the error off the line today, which he's keen to look into, but it's got to be a green box for Verstappen at the British Grand Prix. The McLaren keeps getting better and better. The McLaren upgrades that arrived for Norris in Austria worked perfectly. The British driver managed to get 4th at the Red Bull Ring after a great performance. Those upgrades have now arrived for his teammate Oscar Piastri, and Norris even received some further upgrades to his front wing for his home Grand Prix. It was impressive to see the pair of them perform so well at Silverstone, as their upgrades seemed to have taken them into the fight with the frontrunners. Had I been told that the McLaren would be fighting in 2nd and 3rd at the beginning of the season, I would have found it very difficult to believe, given just how far back McLaren were right at the start of the year. It shows that we're still early on in this regulation set, and the teams can make huge gains from their upgrades as they go through this year. The McLaren leapfrogging several other teams will be a wake-up call, especially to the likes of Alpine, who seem to be in a comfortable 5th place in the Constructors' Championship just a few races ago. Another thing that's been particularly impressive for McLaren is their drivers. Last year they had a driver that was delivering in Norris, and then they had Ricciardo who was struggling to keep up with his teammate. But with their bold move to go for the rookie of Oscar Piastri, they have a driver that is getting more and more confident at each and every Grand Prix. For me, I think this weekend is the race where Piastri seems to have arrived in the sport. He's been underwhelming so far this year with some promising signs, but now he has the upgrades that seem to unlock the pace in his car, he's delivered straight away. So the McLaren has reached a new height in the last couple of weekends, and having qualified 2nd and 3rd, they ran 1st and 3rd for the beginning of the race. It was a really impressive start as Norris got off the line well and took the lead into turn 1. Piastri almost got Verstappen into turn 1 as well. But from there, it was the McLarens with Verstappen that were building the lead on the rest of the pack. Earlier this year, there were signs that the McLaren pace was strong over a single lap, but not in the races, and that seems to be a thing of the past at these last few Grand Prix. The pair both looked comfortable in the car and were setting the pace over the rest of the field, and it seemed like the Ferraris and Mercedes cars couldn't match it. Following the safety car restart, the McLaren seemed to be on the wrong tyre with the drivers around them on the soft compound while they chose the hard. It was reported that the McLaren team chose this compound based on the fact that they faced high tyre wear all year, and so they were conservative when it came to their tyre choice. The hard tyre was the right choice for them in the end though, showing McLaren's intelligence when it comes to race strategy. It resulted in their best finish since the Italian Grand Prix in 2021 when they took a 1-2 finish. The additional downforce that McLaren were running enabled Norris to stay ahead of Hamilton through the high-speed corners, as the Mercedes car ate its soft tyres towards the end. And despite this downforce, they were still so incredibly fast on the straights, which means they've unlocked downforce and they've avoided adding drag. The perfect combination. It'll be fascinating to see if they can keep this up at other circuits throughout the rest of the season. It was a mighty performance from Lando to keep the 7-time champion behind him towards the end and control it to the finish. And overall, it was an amazing performance from Norris, from Piastri, and from the McLaren team. For me, I think this team deserve a purple box for this weekend. They were incredibly fast and have made such an impressive jump up the order from their upgrades in the last few weeks. It's unbelievable to see such improvements, and it's rare to see these kinds of jumps mid-season. It certainly makes the midfield very interesting indeed. Before we take a look at Hamilton's race next, I want to take a moment to ask you to subscribe to Behind the Drive. We're working to bring you the best F1 content out there, and you need to subscribe to see it first. Hamilton does all he can at his home Grand Prix. The Mercedes cars qualified 6th and 7th at Silverstone. It was a disappointing performance, and the team have been shown up by another one of their engine customers in McLaren this weekend after being outperformed by Aston Martin earlier this season. It seems like they're struggling to find qualifying pace, but at the same time they look much stronger in the Grand Prix. Russell, starting on softs, worked well as he progressed past Sainz and was fighting with Leclerc early on. Meanwhile, Hamilton's mistake early on in the race, where he went off on lap 1, dropped him down the order. Despite this though, Hamilton maximised his car this weekend and took advantage of a cheap safety car stop to leapfrog his way to 3rd. From there, it looked like Hamilton would be able to fight Norris given he was on the softs and the McLaren was on the hard compound, but he failed to get past given the pace of the McLaren. He felt like he was struggling to keep up with their straight line speed, and it seemed like that was something that all teams were impressed by this weekend. I think the Mercedes team have made some good progress this year as they made the choice to change their approach. But since the first major upgrade, which became clear in Spain, they've been caught again by others around them. What is working for Mercedes is the fact that they're now the 2nd or 3rd team on a consistent basis. They are the ones able to fight with either Ferrari, Aston Martin, or, at Silverstone, McLaren. This shows their concept works on multiple track types and they're always strong when it comes to strategy. In addition, the Mercedes drivers are both delivering. Hamilton's race back to 3rd this weekend was impressive and helps the team build a larger gap to Aston Martin in the Constructors' Championship. Hamilton rounded out a double British podium this weekend, and for that, I think he deserves a green box. It was a strong race, and yes, there was a bit of luck with the safety car, but even without that, he was on a strong strategy that should have got him ahead of the Ferraris. What's gone wrong for Aston Martin? Aston Martin were the talk of the sport earlier on this season. The team made huge gains in the off-season and found themselves to be the closest challenger to Red Bull early on in the year. Fernando Alonso was the driver that was leading the team, as he seemed to be capable of taking advantage of the pace of the Aston Martin. Early on in the year, Alonso finished in the top 3 in 6 of the first 8 races, and in the last 2 he seems to have struggled to get even close to the top 4. It seems like the Mercedes upgrades from Monaco, the Ferrari upgrades in Spain, and now the McLaren upgrades across the last 2 races seem to have all allowed those teams to catch up and get ahead of the Aston Martins. With Alonso fighting at the back end of the top 10 at Silverstone, Lance Stroll was fighting for the points, which suggests that the Aston Martins were not at the same level this weekend. There could be many factors in this. The circuit characteristics at Silverstone might not suit their car, or, similarly, the weather conditions may have suited other cars more than theirs, but it could equally be a sign that Aston Martin aren't on track compared to some of the other teams. The Aston Martin team has had more wind tunnel time over the first half of the year, but they now have less time based on their Constructors' Championship position at the midpoint of the year. This might not have had an immediate impact, but it implies that they might not have been able to take advantage of the early season benefit that they had at the start of the season. For Aston Martin, they ended up 7th and 14th this weekend, which is one of their worst results of the season so far. Feels like a long time ago that Alonso is claiming that he would get a podium at every race this year, as many other teams are now in that fight. What we do know is that the teams are finding huge gains from upgrades, which hopefully will be the case for Aston Martin. So it's got to be an amber box for Aston Martin for now, as there are signs that things are going wrong for the team, which will hopefully turn around in Hungary. Perez is running out of time. There are 2 Red Bull contracted drivers who are at risk of losing their seat midway through this season. Right now, Sergio Perez and Nick de Vries are both underperforming, and they are under a huge amount of pressure to deliver, as all Red Bull drivers are. Perez had another dreadful weekend at the British Grand Prix. He failed to make it out of Q1 in the qualifying session as the conditions improved towards the end of that part. I would argue that the Red Bull team put him out at the wrong time on the Q1 restart, but at the same time, the Mexican driver still failed to deliver the lap that he needed for the 2nd weekend in a row. It's becoming ridiculous how far behind Perez is from his teammate. He's busy fighting back to get into the points, while Verstappen is still comfortably winning each race at the moment. This weekend, Perez fought back once again as he finished the race in 6th. He was heavily aided by the safety car, which gave him a cheap pit stop, and the field being bunched up, which he took advantage of as he was on the soft compound tyre. Realistically, to have the best car on the grid and to only finish 6th is not really acceptable on a circuit where overtaking is certainly possible. The Red Bull team leads have been talking about how good Daniel Ricciardo has been in the simulator recently after saying he was a bit rusty earlier in the season. Given the championships are pretty much wrapped up for Red Bull, you have to say that they should be considering giving Ricciardo a go so that he can have a chance to prove himself before next season, where they might need two cars in the fight every weekend. There's lots to consider here, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility if Perez continues with these disappointing performances. Something isn't working for Perez right now, and I hope he finds a way to get back, but for now it has to be another red box for the Mexican driver, as his form has hit an all-time low. Honourable Mentions. I want to give an honourable mention to the Ferraris, who almost got a red box this weekend for some odd strategy, and the fact that they seem to be well off the pace this weekend anyway. 9th and 10th is not enough for a team that's within the fight for second in this championship. On the flip side, the Williams continues to show promise. Albon and Sargent looked good earlier in the practice sessions this weekend, and I think Albon's performance to take 8th shows just how great his driving is at the moment and just how far this team have come. And the final honourable mention is going to be another potential red box for Lance Stroll. His fights with Pierre Gasly were dreadful and the kind of racing you might expect from a rookie. It's not enough for the Canadian driver, and I think he needs to start fighting for his team a little bit more now they have a lot of work to do to catch up. It'll be fascinating to see how the fight for second develops through the rest of this season. There are now 4 teams competing for that spot, and if McLaren keep this up, it'll be so exciting for the rest of the races.